It has rained for 5 days running. The world is a round puddle of sunless water, where small islands are only beginning to cope. A young boy in my garden is bailing out water from his flower patch. When I ask him why, he tells me young seeds that have not seen sun forget and drown easily. Hello, and welcome to Words That Burn, the podcast taking a closer look at poetry. This episode's poem is Coping by Audre Lorde. It is a poem that evokes a feeling that many of you may be experiencing as you move through the world today. That feeling is overwhelm. I think none of us are strangers to that urge to turn off the news and bury our heads, especially when we are witnessing the barrage of chaos that seems to reign these days. We're not even a quarter of the way through the year, and already we are bearing witness to an unimaginable amount of horror around the globe. The US government has kidnapped a world leader in the dead of night. The Israeli state continues to eradicate Palestine and its people from the face of the earth. Iran is in the grips of a bloody suppression of its people. There is a list that has been published that is filled with so many horrors we cannot even begin to fathom them. The outlook at this moment is bleak. There seem to be no consequences for so many of the worst people you've ever encountered doing some of the most awful things that you yourself struggle to comprehend. Giving up in the face of all of this feels like the only sane choice. But we absolutely cannot do that. That is why Audre Lorde is more crucial than ever. It would be a great insult to say that Audre Lorde was only a poet. It would be a huge betrayal of the woman she was and all that she fought for to relegate her identity to so small a box. In many of her public appearances and speeches, she would introduce herself by some variation of, "I am a black, lesbian, mother, warrior poet, doing my work, coming to ask you if you're doing yours." That is a paraphrased quote from her essay, The Transformation of Silence into Action. More often than not, the work she was doing was building bridges. If we needed a succinct way to encapsulate Lorde's activism and poetic work, bridge builder might be the most effective term to do so. Throughout her life and career, Lorde constantly sought a way to connect communities and people from all walks of life. She did this not through the now cliché methods of focusing on what we have in common, but rather she focused on the forces that oppress us all. Her targets in both poetry and philosophy were the monoliths of systemic oppression so present in her time and no less present today. Her work sought to break down the silos between the experiences of white and black women, young and old women, rich and poor women. However, in doing so, she staunchly refused to ignore the differences in both life experience and culture inherent in each of those groups. She rebuked the erasure of difference wherever she found it. The most famous instance of this being her searing address to the collected attendance of an academic feminist conference. In one section, she stated to a crowded room that to ignore difference was a total denial of the creative function of difference in our lives. Difference must be not merely tolerated, but seen as a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark like a dialectic. The address would become the now much circulated text, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." It would become the basis of a school of thought that Audre Lorde would use to pursue a radical new sense of community. It is commonly referred to as the architecture of difference. The text "The Master's Tools" would become a key one for the notion of intersectional feminism, the desire within the feminist movement to consider all women's experience, not just the narrow scope of one socio-economic strata. for example, white women. The speech was not a total admonishment of the feminist movement at the time. Far from it. It was a plea by Lorde for a new way to take on systems of oppression, a way that would honour all those in the struggle without reducing them to an amorphous blob. Why am I telling you all this? It isn't poetry, but it is essential in understanding what Audre Lorde stood for. She was direct in her politics, unflinching in her rhetoric, and fearless when it came to expressing new and often radical modes of thinking and doing. Community and building community were always at the heart of her philosophy. Her poetry was her way of making sense of the flood of emotions that came from her experience as a black lesbian mother. And the discussion around it was how she engaged other women and struggling groups. Her words activate the listener. Find a way to ensure others began doing their work. This poem, Coping, is a wonderful example of that. On its surface, it is an almost too simple image of a boy in the rain. Scratching just beneath that idyllic surface, though, we find Lorde's own radical beliefs at work. For the purpose of analysis, I've split the poem into two sections. The first of which goes like this. It has rained for 5 days running. The world is a round puddle of sunless water, where small islands are only beginning to cope. There is an almost biblical sense of ending in these opening lines. There has been a deluge, with the rain coming down for 5 days running. This is pure metaphor from Lorde. She is using an accessible scene to bring her reader, her audience, in. If we pick up on the biblical tone and use it to inform our reading, then this lashing of rain is an apocalypse narrative. It evokes imagery directly from the Bible, Noah and the flood. If we approach it from a purely humanist perspective, it remains just as bleak. 5 days of rain would drain anyone of hope. As if to cement this bleak outlook in our consciousness, Lorde's next words are, "The world is a round puddle of sunless water." Her description leaves little room for interpretation. There is a darkness on her world. For the keen-eyed poetic technique lovers among you, you'll have noticed a very fluid enjambment technique in the first section. The lines are short and rapid, bleeding into each other. They conjure the feeling of torrential rain, unrelenting and liquid. The sunless water is hopeless in the extreme. We would be forgiven for thinking that the world had collapsed under its own weight. All is not lost though, as the section ends with where small islands are only beginning to cope. There are small bastions of land not yet submerged, managing, however faintly, to stay dry. This pure metaphorical poetry comes from Lorde's 1978 collection, The Black Unicorn, a collection of poems that were inspired by a trip to Benin in West Africa with her family. It led to an emerging awareness of black, particularly African mythology for Lorde. The collection itself is a remaking or reclaiming of patriarchal myth, with the sole intention of bringing forth a stronger voice for black women, mothers, and lovers. It was a trip that would teach Lorde the importance of myth and parable as a tool for broader communication. Accessibility was always at the heart of Lorde's political and poetic work. Myth, with its vibrant imagery, fantastical thinking, and reliance on metaphor, became a vehicle through which Audre Lorde could share even her most radical ideas easily with society. That use of myth is very present in this poem. The world drenched in rain is an easy parallel for the society that Lorde found herself living in as a black lesbian. In her essay, The Transformation of Silence into Action, she wrote of the way in which women needed to live their lives if they were to, in her words, survive in the mouth of this dragon we call America. We have had to learn this first and most vital lesson. that we were never meant to survive. For some of you listening, this comparison of America to a dragon's mouth might feel hyperbolic. But I'd wager from those of you that listen to my podcast from the United States, this rings absolutely true. I'd argue it's never been more true than today. Regardless of how you feel about it, understanding Lorde's lived experience makes the metaphor that much easier to interpret. Her world of sunless water is a society of oppression. With that key piece in place, understanding the small island's image is just a hop, skip and a jump away. These islands are above the water of this world. They are the series of small oases that represent the people and communities that refuse to or have no option to participate in the world of oppression. They, however, are only beginning to cope. They need something more. The second section of the poem gives us a sense of what that is. Before I read that section, I have a favor to ask. If you've been enjoying this episode or enjoy the podcast generally, please consider following it or subscribing to it wherever you listen. It could be on Acast, it could be on YouTube, it could be on Spotify, it could be on Apple Podcasts. If you're really enjoying it, please consider leaving me a review wherever you're listening. Better yet, if you know someone who would enjoy the work of Audre Lorde, please consider sharing this episode directly with them. If you'd like to understand more about Audre Lorde and you prefer to read, you can find a link to this episode's script below in the description. It's hosted on Substack and has full citations for any of the quotes or academic research done to back up the episode. With that being said, let's get back to the poem. A young boy in my garden is bailing out water from his flower patch. When I ask him why, he tells me young seeds that have not seen sun forget and drown easily. The complexity of the poem's metaphor deepens, and we switch from the global image of a world underwater to a single individual doing their best. We could argue that the boy here is Lorde's own son. Autobiography was a huge theme in her work after all. She had 2 children, and they inspired much of her poetry and writing. Motherhood brought forth an unexpected font of new perspective and drive for a better world in Lorde. From the moment they arrived, they became both a new reason and a new way to seek revolution. The impact her children had on her life cannot be understated. Biographer Alexis Pauline Gumbs puts it best in her book on Lorde titled "Survival is a Promise." She states, Audre's children became her teachers in the revolutionary work of mothering. She observed them with true interest and wonder. Audre and the children had bi-weekly family meetings in order to check in about the logistics and emotional life of their household. This approach to parenting was pure nurture. Audre Lorde practiced what she preached, starting at the kitchen table. That description from Gumbs is an approach to building community, even if it is just a community of a mother and her children. This checking in about logistics and emotional life was the same approach she would take to community building on a broader scale. Her observation of her children has been translated literally into this poem. The boy is at odds with the bleak first section of the poem. He does not seem to be coping. There is an inherent lack of comfort, almost a desperation, in that word. It doesn't seem to be present in this section. The enjambment has left the poem now. That relentless flow of words mimicking rain has stopped. Each observed action here receives its own line. A young boy in my garden is bailing out water from his flower patch. It is steady. It is rhythmic. It is not relentless. All calmness, no desperation. The flower patch is another nod to Lorde's way of seeing revolution. Tending to a garden was something to her which instilled the necessary patience and nurturing to bring about real change. She even went as far as to teach her children to grow their own flower beds. Yet more evidence that the boy in the poem is her own son. Our speaker asks the boy why he perseveres despite the rain. They are given a profound answer. He tells me, young seeds that have not seen sun forget and drown easily. The final lines of this poem feel almost like folk wisdom. It is a moral we would hear from Aesop, a warning wrapped up in story by the Brothers Grimm. Yet we shouldn't dismiss it as something for children. It is even more crucial for adults to hear, especially today. Metaphor is hard at work again here. The sun, ever the symbol of change and hope, stands in opposition to the image of the drowning world conjured by Lorde. It is a glimpse of the better world that Lorde never stopped working for. An example of how to be better. A society that should be aspired to. It is the spark we need to see in the world so we don't give up. So that we don't forget and drown easily. These simple few lines resonate with so many of the core themes that drove Lorde passionately. The young seeds who have not seen the sun are the children that Lorde believed in so vehemently. Not only her own, but any children that would become the future of society. These children did not know the sun. They were born into the awful society Lorde was forced to wade in. They cannot comprehend another world, another possibility. And so, like the boy bailing water, it falls to Lorde and all other well-meaning adults to nurture and guide them. On another level, this applies directly to anyone listening to this podcast. I started this episode with a brutal catalogue of world events that just keep coming. You couldn't be blamed for wanting to give in, to do anything, to forget. But you mustn't. Audre Lorde believed in community. She saw it as the only way to overturn the mechanisms of oppression that plagued her and millions like her. She was the example of someone doing the work, doing their best, coping. She bailed out water in her own communities, and we should all try to do the same. It might seem a mystery how we can do that. Occasionally, when we come across such a radical figure as Lorde, they transcend and become something closer to myth. An icon that seems to leave a legacy that no one could live up to. But Lorde would be the first to push back against this. Lorde's greatest belief was that you must use your voice. You must use your voice and share it in any way you can with the people around you. So, you can attend marches for the things you believe in. Take an interest in the politics of your communities. Go to poetry readings and talks that interest you. More importantly than all of that, use your voice and never, never drown easily. I'm aware that whilst Audre Lorde constantly advocated for people to use their own authentic voice, I've been doing a lot of talking about her. So I will leave you with this clip from Lorde herself, one that encapsulates who she was, what she stood for, and most importantly, why I think her example should be followed and studied more than ever today.
Poetry, after all, I think is one of the few ways in which we're allowed to touch emotion, to be reached by other people, in a sense, some of the clearest sharing of experiences that we have. And so I keep coming back to it over and over again.
What did you think of this poem? As always, this is my interpretation, and I would love to hear yours. There are plenty of ways to get in touch with the podcast. You can follow along with the podcast TikTok, the podcast Instagram, the podcast Blue Sky, and any other social media you can find down below in the description. You can leave me a comment on YouTube. If you would like to read the script for this week's episode, alongside all the citations to anyone mentioned or referenced within the podcast. It is down below in the description. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast once again, and hopefully you'll hear from me again soon.